Well, let me try then. Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, that's all right, I guess. If I come back, another time, just be ready to do it better, okay? I'm going to take a moment to try to get this microphone kind of pushed up against my head so it won't move while we're talking. Well, as we advertise, so to speak, tonight we're going to be doing our biggest presentation, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Come on, the one about dinosaurs?
Yes.
Our biggest presentation, right?
Yes.
Now, those of you that have been with us all week and so forth know that I've talked about how I grew up at the University of California, Berkeley, a lot of time in the paleontology laboratories there, and we've talked about, of course, dinosaurs before, talking about age of the earth and these kinds of things. But tonight we want to concentrate a bit more on the dinosaurs themselves. And of course, we want to talk about dinosaurs, we want to talk about the Bible, we want to talk about what's really in the ground, as opposed to what they say in the textbooks. And so we're going to be talking about the dinosaurs, the Bible, the fossils, and what is the evidence that's actually in the ground. Now, first of all, when people know about my background, having grown up with paleontology, and they know I'm a Christian and I'm talking about these things, they will always say, well, are dinosaurs found in the Bible? And I say, of course dinosaurs are found in the Bible. They read it every day. See, you got to watch the screen. Things will happen when you're least expecting them. But of course, think with me. Of course dinosaurs are in the Bible. Remember, there's no such thing as prehistoric. God starts with day one. There's no such thing as prehistoric. The word prehistoric was invented by evolutionists, but technically it has no significant meaning because there is no such thing as prehistoric. Everything is historic. And so what you really do want to talk about, first of all, what does the word dinosaur actually mean? So you have to remember that the word dinosaur was invented in 1841 by a man named Sir Richard Owen. And when he made this word up in 1841, he knew exactly what he meant. Now, when you ask your typical atheist, evolutionist, science teacher, what does the word dinosaur mean? They'll tell you, oh, it means terrible lizard. Or they might say, terrible lizard or thunder lizard. Sometimes they'll say that. But the word doesn't mean that. What he actually named them was awesome lizards. Because in 1841, Sir Richard Owen believed that dinosaurs were a part of God's awesome creation. And so he called them awesome lizards. And that was what the word really means. But of course, for tonight's time period, we wanted to really talk about our dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible. So, take a look. Yes, of course, dinosaurs are mentioned in the Bible. If you'll open your Bibles. Now, tonight I will be using the King James, but I could use any version. It doesn't really make much difference. But take a look at Genesis chapter 1, day 5, verses 21 to 23. Now, what I've done is I have used the King James version for much of this, but I have inserted here also the Hebrew word, but spelled in English characters so that you can actually read it. But God created the great whales, or, again, great monsters, and sometimes sea dragons. It depends on your translation. And every living creature that moves, and every winged fowl. Now, again, God does not use the same classification system that we do. When it says here, winged fowl, or feathered bird in some translations, the word used in Hebrew, doesn't mean just feathered birds. When it says winged fowl, it means any animal, not insects, but any animal that flies. So it includes mammals like bats and reptiles, like the flying reptiles we know of from the fossil record. And so he classifies animals differently than we do. And so it's feathered birds, mammals like bats, and reptiles that fly, all in one word. And so he creates them on day 5. He also creates the creatures that swim in the water, and on day 6 of the week of creation. Let the earth bring forth the living creatures, cattle, creeping things, and your English translation will typically have beast of the earth or beast of the field. That is a direct reference to dinosaurs. And so dinosaurs were created on day 6. Now, flying reptiles, swimming reptiles are not technically dinosaurs, but people tend to associate them with dinosaurs living at the same time. So what we're looking at is dinosaurs or their relatives, because they are reptiles, but flying and swimming ones are not dinosaurs, and many of the land reptiles are not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are a particular kind of reptile. But they're created on day 6, the same day as people. And people and dinosaurs lived together for 1,656 years until the time of Noah's flood. This was not a problem. Now, I'd like to get a big amen from everybody here. Never get your education from Hollywood, National Geographic, the Learning Channel, Animal Planet. Hello? Can I get an amen? Amen? Because that stuff is just totally, garbage. The fact of the matter is, when you see these movies with dinosaurs in them and so forth, remember that these movies were made to promote evolutionary thinking, but they're not accurate to evolutionary theory. Even, I think they're up to Jurassic Park number 102. But number four was so bad that even major evolutionists said you shouldn't go see it. Hello? Now, how bad does it have to be? Hello? But the movies were made to promote evolutionary thinking, but they're not even consistent with evolutionary theories. But it was not a problem for dinosaurs and people to live together. Dinosaurs didn't eat people, and they initially didn't eat each other. Take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 and 30. In Genesis 1, 29 and 30, it says that God created all the creatures as vegetarians to begin with. They were not meat eaters to begin with. And I want to debunk the whole concept that T-Rexes were meat eaters. Now, 23 years ago, evolutionists at the top of the evolutionary chain reclassified T-Rexes, velociraptors, oviraptors as vegetarians. And it is for obvious scientific reasons that they did this. Sharp claws and sharp teeth do not indicate what a creature eats. I have a video out there, a different one, but about dinosaurs. Sharp claws and sharp teeth do not a meat eater make. And initially, I made it for children. I made it for elementary school kids. But I found out adults love it just as much. And in there, I showed dozens of animals that have sharp claws, sharp teeth, and are vegetarians, or mostly vegetarian. And around here, it's obvious. How about beavers? Hello? Now, you would not want to be bitten by a beaver. Would you agree? Let's face it. But lots of things. We can start with the simple and easy ones like hamsters and rabbits. They've got very sharp teeth, but they're vegetarians, correct? But what about bears? Bears are, except for polar bears, generally speaking, they're omnivorous, but most of what they eat is vegetation. And they don't kill to eat, but they will eat meat if they find a carcass. But mostly they eat vegetation, honey, of course, but berries and that sort of thing. But do you know what a bear eats before it will starve to death? And I've seen this. I worked for the Forest Service for a while. And, if it's a bad year and there's no berries and the honey's very scarce and so forth, what is the last thing a black bear, a brown bear, grizzly, what's the last thing they'll eat? They don't eat the bark, but they do walk up to trees. And they take those big old claws and they rip the bark off. But they don't eat the bark, they eat the cambium layer, the soft plant tissue between the bark and the wood. That's the growing layer. And that's certainly vegetation, right? Now, I have found that grizzly bears do like seafood. I have watched grizzlies walking on a pebble beach in Alaska, and they will take those big old claws, they will dig through the gravel, and they'll get clams and oysters, stick them in their mouth, break the shells, spit the shells out, and eat the oysters and the clams. So they do like seafood. Hello? And, of course, they eat fish, but that's only for a couple of weeks when they're available. But the fact of the matter is they're mostly vegetarian. But there's lots of other creatures that you can think of that have sharp claws, sharp teeth. I do live down in Florida. Now, down in Florida, it's interesting. We have these screened-in enclosures around swimming pools, especially the farther south you go, okay? Do you know what we use for watchdogs in southern Florida? Well, you might think gators, but that's not true. But what we do is we do use iguanas. Now, I could show you the pictures. They're in the video. But iguanas have teeth that look exactly the same as T-Rex teeth. They're just much smaller. But they're 100% vegetarian. We use them for watchdogs because they're generally nocturnal. And you put them out in the enclosures and they can eat the vegetation around the pool. But if anybody comes in, they're very, very possessive of territory. And they will attack. And they have these huge, sharp claws. And you would never want to be bitten by one. But they're vegetarians. So sharp claws, sharp teeth don't indicate that a creature is, in fact, a meat eater. And so think with me for just a second. T-Rexes. Now, you've all seen movies. You've seen skeletons maybe in museums and so forth. They were reclassified as vegetarians. Think about them for a moment. Yes, they have these big, long, sharp teeth that come to a point, right? The largest T-Rex tooth found is about 10.5 inches long. That span about 10.5 inches. But you've got to remember, they have a shallow root. They have only a 4-inch root. Now, your teeth stick 2/3 into the gum and 1/3 out. Their teeth are more than 2/3 out and less than 1/3 in. And they're widely spaced, correct? Now, think about it. Have you ever seen one of their teeth up close and personal? Never? You really ought to sometime. I can show you the pictures. T-Rex teeth are serrated like a bread knife. Now, you don't need serrations to cut meat. You need serrations to cut thick vegetable material like celery, palm fronds, and things like that. And, well, they're kind of slow, frankly, and a bit dim-witted. But what about those little tiny arms? You ever notice the little tiny arms in here? I mean, seriously, those arms are so short. Now, they do have some sharp claws, but the arms are so short you can't even eat with those things. Hello? And for other scientific reasons as well, they've been reclassified as vegetarians. How did they eat? Well, they went up to palm fronds, and there used to be huge lycopod forests with big leaves and banana leaves. Think of it that way. And what happened? They clamped down on them, and then they simply moved their head sideways. And they stripped the pulp off the leaf, leaving the skeleton of the leaf behind. And they are vegetarians. And so you have to kind of rethink your mind about these things. Now, the first mention of dinosaurs after the flood is in Job chapter 40. So, again, T-Rexes, velociraptors, and oviraptors and so forth could live with people because they were vegetarians. I mean, this young gentleman right over here, you could have had a pet T-Rex if you'd lived before the flood until it got too big to keep in the house. You know, you don't keep a 30-foot long reptile in the house. Hello? But you have to rethink these things. And so it wasn't a problem. Now, before the flood actually occurred, they did start eating some animals, but most of it was carrion. That, the things were already dead. They didn't kill them. Now, there were dinosaurs in the ark. Remember that God sent to Noah one pair of the unclean kind. Reptiles are, by definition, always unclean. And we're going to talk about dinosaurs on the ark, but just for a moment, assume I'm right, okay? But after the flood, there are 14 references to dinosaurs or their close relatives in the Old Testament. So the flying, swimming reptiles on day 5, the land-dwelling reptiles, including dinosaurs, on day 6. But after the flood, they come out of the ark and they do start to repopulate. The first mention of them is in the book of Job, chapter 40. Now, just as a timeline, just for everybody to kind of get a timeline, creation is 4000 BC. The flood, 1,656 years later, makes the flood at about 2350, 2340 BC. Job is 350 years after the flood. He's at 2000 BC. And Abraham was a young man at that time. So they possibly could have known each other, but I would say it's unlikely. But they're at the same time. And in the book of Job, you have tremendous numbers of scientific statements. But in chapter 40, God is speaking. This isn't Job, this is God, right? And God says, behold now. God's saying, pay special attention. Is that correct? Okay, God said, looky here. Hello? At this creature, and notice it says, behemoth. This word is a Hebrew word. It is not translated in the Bible. It is simply spelled in English characters. But if we were to translate this Hebrew word into English, it means beast of beasts. Beast of beasts. Now, first of all, does that sound big? Right? And he says, I made with you. Remember, dinosaurs were created on day 6 and people on day 6. They really were made with each other on the same day. And then it says, he eats grass like an ox. He is a vegetarian, correct? Well, in the next verse, verse 16 says that he has tremendous strength and power. This is a big, powerful animal. Next verse, 17, says he has a tail the size of a cedar tree. Now, you are going to have Bibles that have commentaries or notes in the margins, and you're going to have people who will say, oh, this is just some big, large land animal we know of today. That it's an elephant, mammoth, mastodon, a rhinoceros, a hippopotamus, just some big animal we know today. But let's think about that for a second, okay? Now, does an elephant have a tail the size of a cedar tree? I don't think so. And, well, as a matter of fact, I hate to say this, in Africa they use elephant tails as fly swatters. It's a very hard way to get fly swatters, folks. Okay, it's very hard on the elephant. Hello? And does a hippo have a tail the size of a... What's the matter? You've never been mooned by a hippo before? But does it have a tail the size of a cedar tree? Definitely not. And if an elephant or a hippo had a tail the size of a cedar tree, I mean, what would they look like? Hello? God is clearly describing a large, air-breathing, land-dwelling dinosaur at the time of Job 4,000 years ago. And then one more verse, verse 18. Now, when you read this, particularly in the King James, it sounds rather poetic because it's written in Shakespearean language. And it says, his bones are as strong as, well, tubes of brass and bars of iron. And that may sound poetic to you, but actually it's God's scientific statement that proves this is a reptile. Mammals and people, we have solid bones. But birds and reptiles have hollow bones. They are tubes. And so when God says that this creature has bones that are like tubes of brass and bars of iron, that's a scientific statement. God is telling you this is a reptile. It's not a mammal. Now, this is the drawing of a brachiosaur. This is the dinosaur that was made world famous in Jurassic Park movie number 1. This is the dinosaur that sneezed all over the little girl. Hello? Come on, folks. I'm just trying to bring back vivid memories. Hello? Well, a fully adult brachiosaur is about 43 foot long. This is a medium-sized dinosaur. And so, well, I would like to show you a picture of just the toe bone of one of these creatures, and I'm going to compare it to the size of my knuckle. Everybody with me? So I'm going to show you a photograph of the toe bone of one of these creatures and just compare it to the size of my knuckle. Are you ready? You don't sound ready. Are you ready? Oh. Uh-huh. Apparently it takes a lot to impress you guys. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me show you the photograph of what it would look like if a man were standing next to the front leg of a brachiosaur. Are you ready? Yes. That wasn't really good. Are you ready? Yes. And you know this is true because it comes from the infamous National Geographic. Uh, but those bones, don't they look like tubes of bronze and bars of iron? Oh. And Job 41. Here God describes a large marine reptile called Leviathan. Now again, it's not technically a dinosaur, but it is a large marine reptile. And God must love Leviathans. He mentions them 5 times in Scripture. He must love them, is that right? Yes. Job 41 has a description of what a Leviathan looks like, but they are also mentioned in 4 more verses, in Job 3, as well as Job 41, in Psalm 74, Psalm 104, Isaiah 27. By the way, please do not be concerned about the little numbers over here on the right. Those are the verses in the Russian Bible. Psalms is not numbered the same way in the Russian Bible. So, but these are your English Bible references. And so he mentions them. Now let's think. Job is 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, and God talks about Leviathans, right? Isaiah lived 700 to 750 BC. He's a contemporary of the king Hezekiah, and he says that there were still Leviathans in the ocean in his day, and that's only 2,700 years ago, correct? Now, up until roughly World War II, creation-believing scientists like myself, and there were creation-believing scientists in those days, but in those days, when they looked at Leviathan and the description of Leviathan, they thought it was one of these creatures. For instance, the Chronosaur, which would reach up to 30 foot long, or possibly a plesiosaur. It reaches up to 51 feet long. There's also an elasmosaur. There were various marine reptiles. But in the 1940s, we had to not change our opinion. What a good scientist does is he modifies his position based on new discoveries. Because in the 1940s, we found this. It's called the super croc. That's the nickname. You see, it is 40 foot long and would have weighed about 10 tons. Now, I think you'll have to admit that is a lot of croc. But what's particularly interesting is we found it in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Now, what is a 40-foot-long crocodile doing in the middle of the Sahara Desert? The classic response is anything he wants to, you know. But let me show you the skeleton of one. So this is an actual fossil skeleton of the super croc. And I don't know about you, but would you agree? We as people, when we see skeletons and so forth of big animals, we're just drawn to the size of the skulls and the size of the teeth. Is that right? Well, let me show you the skull up close. The skull is 6 foot long. And you see the little guy right here? He's called a light snack. Now, I have mentioned I'm going to be back in Brazil doing mission work this summer. I started doing mission work in Brazil in 2005. And the first year that I went to Brazil in mission work, we found a fossil crocodile, a fossil alligator, and the size of it would indicate that it was 50 foot long. Uh-huh. Kind of impressive? You know, alligators in Florida today only grow about 15, 16 foot long, but they used to grow 50 foot long. Now, here again, references to dragon. Remember, the word dinosaur didn't come into existence until 1841. But before that, the most common word for dinosaur was dragon. And now, there were a few other words like lindworm, that was another one, but dragon was the most common word used before 1841. And in many English translations and other language translations, such as Psalm 91, verse 13, it uses the word dragon. Now, you might find the word serpent. But remember, serpent means reptile, and reptile can include dragons, right? But in the Russian translation, it says dragon. In the Portuguese Bible, because I have to know what it says there when I'm in Brazil or in Russia and so forth, it says dragon. Now, with that in mind, This is a relatively small dinosaur. We found this at Hell Creek in Montana back in 2003. It's 12 foot long. And the technical name is Dracorex hogwartsii. And it sound familiar to anybody? Anybody here familiar with the Harry Potter movies? Uh-huh. Yeah, it's named after Hogwarts. But the nickname is Dragon King, okay? But what I would like to do is, here you see this whole skeleton, but what I want to do is this. I want to show you the photograph of just the skull of this dinosaur, okay? And when you see the skull, tell me, does it sort of kind of resemble what you would expect a dragon to sort of kind of look like? Hello? So this is what the skull looks like. Now, does that sort of kind of look like what you'd sort of kind of expect a dragon to look like? Uh-huh, I agree completely. Now, also in Isaiah 14, Isaiah chapter 30, twice Isaiah says he saw flying dragons or flying serpents or flying reptiles. But again, many translations say flying dragons. But again, this is only 2,300 years ago, correct? Now, when it comes to flying serpents, flying reptiles, flying dragons, well, these are drawings of just two. Now, there's others, there's many others, but this is just an illustration of two of the flying reptiles we know of from the fossil record. And now, the little one up here, the name is Rhamphorhynchus. Now, I'm leaving tomorrow morning, and on Friday there will be a spelling test. Uh-huh. Now, Rhamphorhynchus, it's on this size of a seagull. And you all do know what a seagull looks like, right? So Rhamphorhynchus is only the size of a seagull. However, I want to talk about this one down here. Now, I'm going to show you the fossil skeleton of one of those creatures hanging up in the ceiling of a museum, okay? So this is an actual photograph. And here, you see the actual skeleton hanging up in the ceiling of a museum. But would you agree, it's a little hard to tell how big that is, right? You really don't know how big that is, right? You can see it, so there's really no perspective, correct? So I want to show you the illustration of what it would look like if a man were standing next to one of these creatures. Are you ready? Yes. You know, you don't really sound that ready. Oh, you are ready. Okay. All right. There's the man. There's the creature. It has a wingspan of 36 feet. This is not something you want to, run into in a dark alley. Oh, come on, folks, group hug. Well, those are the references in the Bible, but what about at the close of the Old Testament? Well, at the time the Old Testament closed, about 400 BC, there's a very, very important Greek man. His name is Herodotus. He's called the father of history. That's how important he is. He's the first ancient historian outside of the Bible to write reliable histories. And 2,400 years ago, just after the Old Testament is complete, he writes about flying winged serpents. And his description here, well, it could easily be Rhamphorhynchus, the little one. And so this is 2,400 years ago. So we have the biblical account of dinosaurs. There are other references I didn't get to, but I gave you some of them. And then what about reliable human history? Well, the first one is Herodotus. That's 2,400 years ago. But 100 years later, we have another very famous Greek evolutionist. How many of you remember the guy named Alexander the Great? Come on, you remember Alexander, right? Come on, folks, if you don't remember him, he'd be really upset. That's why he called himself the Great. Hello? Oh. Well, he's leading his troops into northwest India about 2,300 years ago, and his soldiers saw dragons along the way. And if you are going to be a serious student of the Bible, you must read the first century Christian historian, the Apostle Luke. But if you're going to be a serious student of the Bible, you must also read the histories of Flavius Josephus. Now, he's the non-Christian historian of the first century. And in his writings, he writes about flying serpents. And he gives us a very interesting reference. He says they lived in holes in the ground but flew through the air. It has been less than 30 years since we found what I will call fossil dinosaur burrows. We have actually found where small dinosaurs did dig holes in the ground, and they're sophisticated. This isn't just a hole. They actually dug 90, went 90. This is a defensive idea that was used by the medieval knights in building castles. And yet these little dinosaurs were doing it a long time ago. And so his description that there were those that lived in the ground but flew through the air makes it very, very credible. And at the same time that Josephus is writing his very famous histories, we have another very famous evolutionist. He is a Roman naturalist. His name is Pliny the Elder. Now, Pliny the Elder died at the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 because a naturalist is kind of like a pre-scientist, okay? So a naturalist is a sort of a pre-scientist, as we would call them today. And he wanted to study volcanoes, and he got too close. Come on, don't tell me science can't be dangerous. Hello? But 2 years before he died, he wrote a book, and he talked about how dragons fought elephants in India in that time, 2,000 years ago. Now, he was never in India. This is secondhand information. But a couple hundred years later, we have another Roman naturalist who did go to India. His name is, oops, got too far there. His name is Flavius Philostratus, and he wrote that India was full of dragons, that every ridge had one. And there were those that lived in the marsh as well. And the ones who lived in the marsh were slow and sluggish, and they had no crest on their head. Now, why would he include that? Well, that would only be if he knew that there were those that did have a crest on their head. Is that right? And then, we can't give you every reference, but St. George and the Dragon is a real story. The great epic poetry, Beowulf, and those sorts of things describe dinosaurs or their relatives. But I'm going to go to a guy named Marco Polo. Y'all remember a guy named Marco Polo? Oh, come on, folks. You remember. Marco Polo. Okay. Now, he left Europe in 1271, and he walked to China. And he enters into Western China in 1273 and accurately describes a large two-legged dinosaur. He says that it was a reptile, a serpent, right? And it was about 30 foot long, had a big head full of big sharp teeth, something that looks kind of like that. And he describes it accurately only 700 years ago, correct? Now, in the very famous year of 1611, we have the official court records of the Emperor of China hiring a royal dragon feeder or royal dragon caregiver. It can be translated either way. But that's only 400 years ago, correct? Well, let's go back in time. Let's go back to Europe. We're going to go to England in the year 1484. Now, in 1484, William Caxton was the first man in England to use a printing press with movable type. Now, Gutenberg developed the printing press in Europe in the mid-1450s. By this time, it's now in England, right? Now, he never actually printed a whole Bible, but he did print Bible verses on this press. But he also printed a book on that press saying that dinosaurs lived in northern Italy at that time. So that's 1484, correct? Only 90 years later, we have a legitimate scientist. A scientist who is so famous, he's called the father of modern natural history. His name is Ulysses Aldrovandus. And he is famous in the history of science because he is the first man in human history to acquire a large building, acquire over 7,000 samples from nature, and put them on display in the first World's Natural History Museum. And only 90 years after this book is published, he records an encounter with a small dinosaur. Now, think with me. It was only a baby. It was only 2 foot long. But here he has painted for us what it looked like. You can see scales. It's obviously a reptile, long tail, clawed feet, the forked tongue like a snake. I mean, it's obvious. Now, remember that 500 years ago, science, the language of science was Latin. Everything was done in Latin. And above the picture of this dinosaur, he writes a description, and the very first word here in Latin is dragon. So he labeled it dragon. Is that correct? Now, does anybody notice anything particularly interesting about this painting? Oh, only 2 legs in the front, no legs in the back, huh? That's interesting, isn't it? Well, you might think this is fiction, but it's not fiction. Let me show you a reptile alive today in Mexico that has only 2 legs in the front. There's one reptile today alive that has only 2 legs in the back. It lives in the soil, kind of like a mole, has a very pointed snout, and it pushes its way through the soil. Well, front legs would be a disadvantage for that purpose. You'd want only the back legs to push you. Is that right? So this is not fake. This isn't fiction. This is reality. And then the year is 1496. The Bishop of Carlisle, Richard Bell, died. Now, Carlisle is one of the most northern cathedrals in England. It's right up near the Scottish border. I was there about 7 years ago, and in that year he died. Now, the tradition was that bishops were buried in the floor of the cathedral. Anybody here involved with music program of any kind? Musicians, singers? You are? Okay. Well, this is for you then. He was buried in the middle of the choir. Apparently he liked music. But English cathedrals are world famous for their brass plaques. And here you see many of them intact. And down below here, we see this rectangular one, correct? Now, I know you can't see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to magnify it where you can see it, right? It looks like that. Now, what do we see here? We see 2 dinosaurs with their necks entwined, but please notice they are 2 different species. Notice the one on this end has spikes on its tail. This one does not, correct? Ladies and gentlemen, that is enough information. We know the species of dinosaur that is. We can actually identify it. Now, the other one is our best guess, I admit. But we can actually identify the one on the left. And this is only 500 years ago. Now, I'm not showing you all of them. I have a video out there on people and dinosaurs live together. There's more references there. But I want to give you one more reference. And it is so important because it comes from an evolutionary source. The year is 1883. This comes from Scientific American magazine. This is the house organ of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, totally devoted to evolution. But in 1883, they published an article in their own publication that talked about how a small armored dinosaur was seen in Bolivia in 1883. Now, when an evolutionist says that a small armored dinosaur was seen in Bolivia in 1883, I think you ought to pay attention. How about you? Agreed? Now, that's just some of the references. We have art. We have artifacts. We have other histories proving that people and dinosaurs did live together. So I'm going to stop the pictures for just a moment because I want to talk a little bit about dinosaurs and so forth. Now, I live in Florida. We've got a lot of reptiles in Florida. Now, what is one of the unique characteristics of reptiles? Reptiles never stop growing. Fish and reptiles never stop growing. And you know up here, the longer a snake, the older the snake, right? Now, down in Florida, we also have reptiles. We call them alligators. We have so many alligators in Florida, we think of them as neighborhood pets. I'm serious. We have over 1 million alligators just in the state of Florida. And we have so many, we think of them as neighborhood pets until they get to be about 6 foot long. Now, I stretch 6 feet here. And when alligators get to be about 6 foot long, they kind of go through this personality change. and they get really nasty. And they start eating the cats, the dogs, the old people, tourists. We hate it when they eat the tourists. We do. It's so bad for business. But we lose several tourists every year to alligator attack because they won't listen to us when they say, don't go near one, you know? And they die from terminal stupidity. So just think about that one. Now, in Florida, well, if you don't believe me, just a few years ago, we took a 12-foot-long male alligator out of a drainage canal in the middle of downtown Miami, Florida. Now, this is why we don't have homeless people in downtown Miami, Florida. Now, we have so many alligators that we now have a hunting season on them. So let's think about this. They never stop growing. And while we do have a hunting season, there's also places where you cannot hunt them, right? Now, let's think about this for just a moment. Today, in Florida, where alligators are not hunted, male alligators can reach a length of 15, even 16 feet in size. And sometimes you'll even see news things on TV about a 15-foot gator walking across a fairway, and believe me, he gets the right of way. Hello? You've seen this, I mean, occasionally. Now, let's think about this. Today, they can reach 15, possibly 16 feet, and in areas where they're not hunted, they have an average life expectancy of 50 years of age. Now, men have an average life expectancy in Florida of 75 in the areas where they're not hunted. Apparently, y'all have never been to Miami. Hello? Well, so that means under the same environmental conditions that alligators live to be 2/3 as old as people, right? 50 and 75, right? So that's 2/3, right? Now, the Bible tells us that there was a time when men averaged slightly over 900 years. From creation to the flood, men averaged 912 years of age if you remove Enoch, who was taken alive by God, and a guy named Lamech, who died young at 770. We asked the Lord about that one time, why he died young at 770. I'm going to tell you what we heard back, and then you can decide whether it was God or indigestion. But he stepped in a gopher hole, broke his leg, and we had to shoot him. Hello? Now, please tell me, if there was a time when men lived to be 900 years old, and there was, how old was the alligator? Excuse me? Come on, if people lived to be 900, then the alligator lived to be 600 years old, and they never stopped growing. Did I not just show you a fossil alligator crocodile that was 50 foot long? Oh. So, obviously that fits with the biblical description, correct? Now, we do hunt alligator. You can come to Florida, you can go to restaurants, you can eat them now. And it's really great because it allows you to put the bite on them instead of the other way around, right? And it's real good smoked and sliced thin deli, or we cut it in 1-inch cubes and fry it. But it's good. Now, with that in mind, I also said that there were dinosaurs on the ark with Noah, correct? Because God sent one pair of each kind, there are only roughly 50 to 55 kinds of dinosaurs. And there really were dinosaurs on the ark. You can see them going in right here. I'm sorry, is that too small for you? Okay, here's a close-up picture right here. How's that? Hello? Now, I want to share a piece of information with you. From the year 1824 to the year 2004, 1,401 names had been given to dinosaurs. But in 2004, creationists and evolutionists came to a sudden conclusion and agreement. Think with me. Atheists, evolutionists want immortality. But how do you get immortality if you're an atheist and an evolutionist? Well, it's really quite simple. When you find something, you name it after yourself. And that gives you immortality. And what we came to realize in 2004 was that somebody had found a baby and named it after himself, and somebody had found a juvenile and named it after himself, somebody had found an adult and named it after the exact same creature. And so we had to throw out all those extra names. And so today, the number is about 670. Of course, occasionally we find new ones, so the number does change slightly. But there are only 50 to 55 different kinds. Now, God sent one male, one female of each kind, correct? Now, that means that there was only 100, 110 dinosaurs on the ark, just to begin with. It was really not that big a problem. And secondly, think with me. Would you agree God is kind of like smart? Excuse me? Would you all agree God is kind of like smart, right? Now, he wants these creatures to live for as long as possible, to reproduce for as long as possible after the flood, correct? So is he going to send the oldest, biggest, most mature animals maybe past the age of reproduction? Or is he going to send the juveniles at the age of puberty? Oh, he's going to send the juveniles at the age of puberty, is that correct? And we now know from the study of dinosaur skeletons that after puberty, well, they have a tremendous growth spurt. And so the dinosaurs on the ark were much smaller than you think. As a matter of fact, I'd like to ask a question of everybody here. I would like you to think of all the different dinosaur kinds you've ever seen in your life. I don't care whether it's a drawing in a book or you've seen skeletons in a museum or heaven forbid, Jurassic Park movies. But think of all the different dinosaur kinds you can think of. And then in your mind, try to average the size of a fully mature adult dinosaur about ready to drop dead from old age. Okay? So just trying to think of all the different kinds. We're going to take a little bid. We did this the other night. But think of all the different, and then in your mind, just try to think, what's the average length of a fully mature dinosaur about ready to drop dead from old age? All right? So I'm taking opening, oh, by the way, remember they all always come from eggs. They all hatch from eggs. And they never stop growing as long as they're alive, right? So I'm talking about the fully mature, about ready to drop dead, right? So can I get an opening bid? Oh, there's one more thing I should tell you. Now, the largest dinosaur we have ever found is about 125 foot long. They're called titanosaurs. They're found down in the south end of South America in Patagonia. But that's just to kind of help you here, okay? So do I have any opening bids? I just said the largest was 125. They can't average 150. Would you like to rebid? I mean, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but it's a little over the top. Did I not just say 125? Did I forget what I just said? And well, I'm looking for the average, but now he did make a valid point. We haven't found them all yet, and that's absolutely true. We could find some that are large. I will agree with you, but average? Okay, I'll take another bid. Hello? 100. I was just saying, I have a bid of 100. What was that? 15 to 20. Sir, you can only bid one, 15 or 20. Come on. I like a guy that's specific. 18. Okay, so I have a bid of 18. I have a bid of 100. Do I have a third bid? 75. Thank you very much, sir. So I have 18, and you said 75. Is that right? And 100, okay? I am going to stop the bidding because we're never going to get there. The actual average length of a fully mature adult dinosaur about ready to drop dead from old age is 4.7 feet. What? I heard that. You see, there were a lot of big dinosaurs. That's absolutely true. However, what evolutionists do not want you to know is there were a lot of little ones too. And the average is only 4.7. Now, I want you to think about that. There were a lot of little dinosaurs. There were dinosaurs that were only the size of a house cat. There were dinosaurs only the size of a chicken. There were dinosaurs, well, there was one dinosaur, let's see. Now, wait a minute. You got to be listening now. Oh, pay attention. You're going to enjoy this now. There was one dinosaur that was only the size of a mouse. Yeah. There was one dinosaur that was only the size of a mouse. It's got a great name. It's called a Mosasaurus. You have to remember, when the French named the creature moose in Canada, it was a contradiction of terms. It was a bit of sarcasm. It actually means mouse, and the moose was the mouse of the forest. Aha. So it was kind of tongue-in-cheek. But the fact of the matter is, there was one dinosaur only the size of a mouse. So there were big dinosaurs, absolutely true, but many, many dinosaurs were rather small. One of my favorites is a little Eoraptor, about 9 inches tall, but walks on 2 legs. And cute guy. Now, with that in mind, when you leave here, I want you to remember the average size, fully mature adult dinosaur was smaller than the large neighborhood dog. Don't you have dogs in the neighborhood that are longer than 4.7 feet? Oh, yeah. I'm sure you do. And so, remember, they weren't that big, and so there was plenty of room on the ark. Hello? Now, with that in mind, this is it's a drawing that you probably have seen at least something like this. You had a textbook that had something that looks like this. This is called the geological time scale or the geological time column. This is the Bible of the evolutionists. Now, with that in mind, you've seen this before. And so, supposedly, you start at the top. And that is today, correct? And then, supposedly, as you dig down through the ground, you find various layers, correct? And supposedly, the deeper you go, the older the layer. And so you can see these ages as we go back here. Supposedly, this goes from today back to 570 million, years ago at the beginning of the Cambrian. And before that, then we have the Precambrian. And so this is their Bible. Now, here's what I'd like you to remember. There is absolutely nowhere in the world you can find all those layers in that order in one place. This does not exist in the ground. It only exists in 2 places. In the textbooks and in the minds of those that believe in evolution. But it doesn't exist in the ground. Now, please do not misunderstand me. The layers do exist, and there are fossils in many of the layers. But there's not one place in the entire world you can dig straight down and go through all those layers as presented. That does not exist. Now, I would also want you to know, and I want to be completely honest with you, there are 25 locations on the surface of the earth. They are lined here and pinned there where you can find some of the layers in the order shown in the textbook. But nowhere does the entire column exist. Even the world-famous paleontologist from Harvard, Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, admitted that there's nowhere where it all exists in one place. And he said this is the trade secret of the paleontologist, the evolutionist. And the trade secret was this. The layers do exist, the fossils do exist, but in fact they are actually located in different places of the world. And the trade secret, as Dr. Gould admitted, was this. What do evolutionists do? Well, evolutionists take layers from different places and then bring them together and put them in the order they want them. Did you hear that? So they take a layer from Canada and a layer from Africa and a layer from Europe, and then they put those layers in the order they want them and then say, you see, we're right. Well, according to the Greeks, that is a tautology that falls in its own weight. It is patently illogical. You cannot rearrange the evidence and then claim proof. And I want to address something for just a moment. The single greatest difference scientifically between the evolutionary scientist I used to be and the creation scientist I am today is this. The evolutionist has to rearrange the evidence before they claim proof, but the creationist does not. We have no incentive to rearrange the evidence because we believe whatever we find is going to be consistent with the Creator God. And we have no incentive to rearrange the evidence. And that is a monstrous difference. Another thing, too, by the way, please just think with me for a second. Would you agree, just thinking here, would you agree if we could find the thickest layer of any one of those layers, it would supposedly represent the longest period of time for accumulation of that layer. Would you agree? As a think thing? Supposedly, if you found the thickest layer of anyone, wherever it was in the world, it would supposedly represent the longest period of time for accumulation of that layer, right? Because if you found less, it just means it had been eroded away, right? Here's the thing. If you take the thickest layer anywhere, put them in the order evolutionists claim, the stack of layers would be 76 miles high. But the average thickness of the layers on the surface of this Earth is 1.2 miles. That means there is 74.8 miles missing. Hello? I believe the technical term for that is bummer. Hello? Yeah, 74.8 miles is missing. And that's the trade secret of the evolutionists. There is nowhere where you can find the whole thing in one place as presented. Something else, by the way. Did you notice that next to these layers, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they'll have, various creatures illustrated that are supposed to have lived at these different times, right? Right? Now, may I ask you a question? Is that a photograph or a drawing? Oh, that's a drawing. Well, the last time I looked, you can draw anything you want to. Hello? And then, let's take a look also. Don't evolutionists say various things like, things are getting bigger, better, faster, smarter, right? I mean, that's the general evolutionary concept that me but a man, that things generally get bigger, better, faster, smarter over time. Is that correct? I mean, that's the general concept. And I want you to know, I love coming to Michigan. I have been coming to Michigan off and on since 1961. I know where Nashville, Michigan is. Do you? Yeah, I knew one couple. But, and the people there love to go to Nashville, Tennessee, which is where my wife is from. Now, but I've been coming up here for a long time. And I love coming up here because you just don't have some of the things that we have in Florida. You know, if you've ever flown to Florida or driven to Florida, after all, you just go right down 75. You've seen those signs at the border of Florida. Welcome to the land of insects. Because we can grow some hummers down there, you know. You go to Naples, and the question is not will the mosquitoes bite you. The question is will they eat you here or take you home. Hello? And I love coming up here because you just don't have some of the things that we have. For instance, in Florida, we have something called a cockroach. And you don't have them. No, you don't. No, you don't have cockroaches. You see, we have cockroaches. Hello? See, our cockroaches are 2.5 inches long. We got cockroaches. And, well, as a matter of fact, let's think about this. Evolutionists say that things get bigger, better, faster, smarter over time. In Florida today, we have cockroaches 2.5 inches long. I've seen them in my garage occasionally. But they used to be over 6 inches long. Now you know you're not going to. And I mentioned that when I was an evolutionist, when I graduated high school in Washington, D.C., my university was 500 miles away. And for those of you that were here Sunday night, initially I had to hitchhike to get a ride, correct? Y'all do remember that, right? But that got old and that got dangerous. Now, I never had a car as an undergraduate student. My parents didn't have the money for me to have a car. But eventually, I got a fairly decent-sized motorcycle. Now, it wasn't a Harley, but it was a good-sized motorcycle. And when I didn't go home on, spring breaks or long weekends and so forth, I would tour all over the eastern U.S. on my motorcycle. Now, up here in Michigan, you have something called dragonflies, right? And the dragonfly species that you have in Michigan tend to be from 1.5 inches across to maybe 4 inches across. Would you say that's about right? I mean, anybody thinks otherwise, please say so. But about different species, but 1.5 inches to about 4 inches across. Have you ever seen a dragonfly with a 6-inch wingspan? You've never seen a dragonfly with a 6-inch wingspan. Well, this tells me scientifically, y'all need to get out of town more often. Because there are dragonflies with 6-inch wingspans. I used to ride a motorcycle, and I've met some. Hello? Now, with that in mind, I would like to show you the photograph of a dragonfly with a 6-inch wingspan. It's right here. So from here to there, that is 6 inches across. Did you happen to notice what it's sitting on top of? Fossil what? Oh, a fossil dragonfly. Good eye. So here's the head. There's the body. This is the tail that actually goes off the picture. And then you see the 2 wings here and the 2 wings there, right? You are absolutely correct. That is a fossil dragonfly. That's not really what's important about it. The important thing is that's a baby. That's a baby fossil dragonfly. You see, adult dragonflies in the fossil record have wingspans of 36 inches. Apparently some of you haven't quite got the picture. Listen, you're on I-75 going south towards Flint at 75. And this 36-inch wingspan dragonfly flies in front of you. I mean, you are talking about serious car wash. Possibly windshield replacement. And if you're on a motorcycle, I don't even want to discuss it. Hello? So, just giving you some examples that I have. Are things getting bigger, better, faster, smarter, or are they getting smaller, slower, and dumber? And the answer is they're getting smaller, slower, and dumber. Another thing, too, don't evolutionists say that things change over time, that one biological life form changes into a different biological life form, then changes into a different one, right? As a matter of fact, the word evolution means change over time. And so they say one kind becomes another, right? But is that true? Is that true? Not a chance. I love your response. Thank you so much. Glad you showed up. Well, let's just take a little look. Here you see the close-up. This is a very close-up of the head of a little ant that today lives in the Dominican Republic. Okay? Below, you see a fossil ant trapped in amber. Here's the problem. You see, this ant is alive today, also in Mexico, but the fossil ant comes from the Dominican Republic, from amber that's supposed to be 25 to 14 million years old, according to evolutionists. But please tell me, do you see any difference? They could be the same ant. They are identical. So that's no change, is that correct? And, well, I know you know these. These are ginkgo tree leaves. And ginkgos, according to evolutionists, are the first tree species to have ever evolved on Earth. Ancient tree species. Has a very unique fan-shaped leaf. And you never park under a ginkgo in the fall because they lose all their leaves in one day. It's like uncovering your car after a blizzard. Hello? But this is a fossil ginkgo leaf from North Dakota. It's very obvious, is it agreed? But according to evolutionists, there's 150 million years between them. Do you see any change? At least no more change than you would expect to see from any 2 leaves on any one tree. Is that correct? And, well, these are horseshoe crabs. Now, those of you that have come down to Florida or gone to some other beach, you've seen maybe horseshoe crabs. They're all over the world kind of thing. Now, those are live horseshoe crabs here. This is a fossil horseshoe crab. That's very, very obvious, correct? This horseshoe crab was found in the year 2008. But according to evolutionists, well, there's supposed to be 445 million years between these 2 photographs. Do you see any difference? And maybe some of you are familiar with the chambered nautilus. You will see them in stores cut in half with a very beautiful spiral on the inside, or sometimes you see them whole. They're white with brown bands. They're very often in Florida used for decorations. My wife and I have one in our home. And today, most of them reach a size of about 8 inches across. Now, there's one species that reaches 10 inches across. But here you see the drawing. Here you see it cut in half so that everybody will remember what it looks like, right? Now, I'm going to quote from the infamous National Geographic. This comes from their January 1976 edition. Now, if you have a problem reading this, I'm going to actually do it over here and it bigger. But what it says right there is, and I quote, "It remains essentially the same as its ancestors of 118 million years ago, a living link with the past." And that's exactly what they said in their article. And today, most species of nautilus are about 8 inches across. There is one that is 10 inches. But in the state of Arkansas, we have found the fossil of a chambered nautilus which is 8 feet across. Today, they're 8 inches across. They used to be 8 feet across. As you can see, there's no essential change, right? Right? Yeah, right. So, first of all, do things change over time? No. Are they getting bigger, better, faster, smarter? No. They're getting smaller, slower, and dumber. And let's take a look in the ground. Again, this is one of the world's oldest fossil bats, according to the evolutionists. It's in the Princeton University collection. It was found in Eocene-dated rock by evolutionists, and that means it's supposedly 34 to 56 million supposed years old. When you look at that fossil bat, doesn't it look like bats today? Oh. Nothing changes from one kind to another, and they get smaller, slower, and dumber, but they don't get bigger, better, faster, smarter. And that is what we find in the fossil record. I would like to mention something else. If you were here Monday night when we talked about carbon-14 doesn't work, potassium argon doesn't work, and so forth, right? There is no modern technology to be able to date anything in the ground accurately. So how do evolutionists date the rocks? How do they date the fossils? Well, this is how they do it. First of all, they tell you how old the layer of rock is in the ground by the fossil it contains, right? Then they tell you how old the fossil is by the rock layer they found it in. I'm sorry, was that too fast for y'all? I'll repeat. They tell you how old the layer is by the fossil you find in it, and then they tell you how old the fossil, well, how old the fossil is by the rock, and then how old the rock is by the fossil. And it is totally self-serving circular reasoning. It falls in its own weight. And the reason I mention that is because of this. This is a picture of the beautiful Chief Mountain in northern Montana. It really is very picturesque. And what we see here is this is a block of sedimentary rock. You can actually look and see layers in it, right? And sedimentary rock comes from the word sediment, meaning deposited by water, correct? And this is why we find fossils in some, but not necessarily all the layers, but this is water-deposited material, okay? And so we see this gray block here. According to evolutionists, that broke off of the Lewis overthrust, went up a 3-degree angle for more than 50 miles. Just want to let that sort of sink in there as to how could that be. And then also, well, this sedimentary rock material sits directly on the sedimentary rock layer below. Now, because of the fossils contained in the upper gray area, evolutionists say this is Precambrian, 1.5 billion years old, containing fossils of only single-celled creatures. But it sits directly on top of the layer below, but according to evolutionists, the layer below is dated Cretaceous at 110 million years old. Anybody here have a problem with that? Do you remember what I said about the two most important questions in science? What is there and what is not? So let's address those questions. What is there? Well, we have two layers of sedimentary rock. According to evolutionary religion, the top is 1.5 billion, the bottom is 110 million. First of all, you got a problem with that? Yes, it's upside down or backwards, correct? And so what's not there? 1.4 billion years is missing in between. Is that correct, sir? Oh. So they're upside down, backwards, and there's 1.4 billion years missing in between. Again, the scientific term for that is bummer. Now, I would like to ask you 3 questions. Now, please, I'm going to ask 3 questions. I would just like you to answer, if you would. No trick questions here. What I'm looking for is consensus. That's all. Okay? So please tell me, can you bend rock? No, you can't bend rock, it will break. Agreed? But you can bend mud. Is that correct? Yeah, as long as it's what's called plastic, but as long as it's wet, you can bend, right? And third question, would you agree with me? Water, still water, lays down flat. Water seeks its own level, correct? And mud is laid down by water that seeks its own level and is flat, correct? Now, that was just for consensus, right? Please take a look at this rock formation from the Big Bend of Texas. Here you see about 35 layers of limestone rock. Would you agree they are highly folded? Is that correct? But they are not broken. They're weathered on the surface, but they're not broken. Now, think with me. That tells you that all 35 layers or so were laid down flat by water. And then because of tectonic forces, they were folded. And after they were folded, then they dried out into hard rock. Isn't that what I see here? Agreed? Well, let's start taking this up in magnitude. Now, this is the very beautiful Calico Hills in the Mojave Desert near the Salton Sea in Southern California. Now, remember, we must always address what is there, correct, and what is not. So, first of all, what is there? Well, this is a parking lot. Hello? But here we have about 70 layers of sedimentary rock. You will notice that they're all folded correctly the same way. Is that right? So they had to all be laid down at the same time while still wet, then folded by tectonic forces, correct? Now, what is not there? Please notice these layers, each one the same kind of material, laid in direct contact on the next layer above, below, correct? So please tell me, why are there no soil horizons? Why are there no V-shaped erosion marks? Why are there no animal holes? Why are there no plant holes if this took a long period of time? If each layer was laid down one at a time, each layer would be exposed for a certain amount of time. And some of it would have eroded into soil. Erosion would erode V-shaped erosion marks into the layers, which would be preserved by the next layer coming in on top, and animal and plant activity would have occurred. But none of that is there, proving that all of it happened at the same time in a really big flood. And let's take this up one more step in magnitude. That is a real place. The nickname is the Wave. Anybody can go there, but you have to get a permit, and they only allow a few people in per day because it's rather fragile. But what do you see here? Here you see almost every kind of sedimentation there is. You see folding, you see bending, you see shearing here, and you see this area right here where it looks like V-shapes? That is called cross-hatching. That only occurs in rapidly moving muddy water. And here you see every kind of sedimentation pretty much you can see. Well, let's take this up one more step in magnitude. Those are the beautiful mountains of the Alps. And please notice, do you notice a layer of mud laid down flat that now goes up, down, and up again, and is only broken here at the escarpment? And do you see that there? That is an entire farming village, if you'd like to get an idea of the size. So what does that tell me? That tells me that the Alps are a fulfillment of Psalm 104, verse 8. That after the water of the flood went away, then the mountains rose up, the valleys sank down to the place where you established them. This is referring to the folding of the wet mud layers as mountains at the time after the flood. And let's just go up one more time. These are the beautiful British Columbian Rockies. Now, does anybody see here any folding? And notice these layers are all straight up and down, parallel. So these are folded, but those, well, they're parallel, but they should be horizontal, but they're vertical. Is that correct? Which means they were laid down flat by water and then rotated in a block fault 90 degrees. And just for size, that is a glacier back there. And so, well, this shows you that it's all rapid formation. Now, for tonight, I have saved something for you. I would like to show you my all-time favorite fossil. Now, you just don't show your all-time favorite fossil to just anybody, right? So we're friends, right? Right? You all need to work on your level of support here. You only show your all-time favorite fossil, not just anybody, right? So we're all friends, right? Yes. Thank you very much. This is my all-time favorite fossil. This is the photograph of a species of Haptosaurus. It's called a Fedorasaurus. Now, this Fedorasaurus fossilized in only 40 years. Anybody remember Monday night? Aha. And it's also interesting because we have also found this Bowlersaurus. Now, this Bowlersaurus we know fossilized in less than 60 years. And at Eureka Springs, Arkansas, next to that Bowlersaurus, we did find that complete whole Hamosaurus. I forgot about that. Come on, folks, that's a complete whole ham, fossilized. Hello? But at Eureka Springs, Arkansas, in 1903, we found that complete whole Flowerosaurus. Hello? Yeah, you can see the stitching here, the burlap bag, and a flower inside. And, this fossilized very quickly. And so if you think about it, that Hamosaurus and this Flowerosaurus were found behind a really old Cracker Barrel. So is fossilization a rapid or a slow process? Oh, it's a rapid process. I agree with you completely. And then this is a man-made stone mortar and pestle. Everybody can see that, correct? And these are other mortar and pestles made by man. And these are some more man-made stone tools. Please notice that these photographs come from my beloved University of California, Berkeley. They were found during the gold rush. Now, the gold rush was from 1850 to 1890. The gold rush was actually 40 years, 4 decades. It began in 49, but the gold rush period is 50 to 80, 90. And so during that period, they were digging the ground for gold, right? Now, we found over 300 man-made stone tools now on display at the University of California, Berkeley, from an area where I grew up. And according to evolutionists, the rock they were found in is 9 to 55 million years old. Anybody here have a problem with that? You do, huh? Or what about this Spoonosaurus? Now, this Spoonosaurus, by the way, you'll notice it's a highly evolved Spoonosaurus that even has an enamel glaze. But it was found in a piece of Pennsylvania coal, bituminous, medium grade, and according to evolutionists, the coal is more than 300 million years old. Anybody have a problem with that? Or what about this, this small black iron pot you see here? Now, when you look at it, it is obvious human manufacture. Would you agree? Now, it was found in Oklahoma inside of anthracite coal, the hardest, blackest, bestest coal there is, and according to evolutionists, more than 300 million years old. And what about this Dollysaurus? Now, come on, that's a Dollysaurus. Oh, come on, folks, that's a human figurine, right? But if you'll notice, this is fired clay. And here you can see it next to the size of a penny. It's really quite small. But it is an obvious human figure, correct? I mean, you have a head, nose, eyes, mouth, neck, torso, 2 arms, leg and a half. It's human, right? But here's the interesting thing about it. It was found in 1889 in the city of Nampa, Idaho. They wanted to drill a water well to provide water for the city of Nampa, and they put the drill rig down on the ground. They drilled straight down 320 feet, and out of the hole popped that little doll. Here's the problem, though. You see, the layer in the ground, 320 feet below the surface at Nampa, is, according to evolutionists, 12 million years old. Enjoying yourself? Well, I got more. Now, what about this Hammersaurus? Now, I find that Hammersaurus quite interesting. Now, if you look at the skull of this Hammersaurus right up here, you'll see that little scratch right there. That is where a little bit of the metal was removed to assay it. It is an almost pure form of soft steel. And the wooden handle here has been broken right here. But you see the little black area at the bottom here? That is coal. So most of what we have here is wood, but the little black area down here is coal. Well, notice also next to the Hammersaurus we found this seashell, okay? Now remember, evolutionists date things by the fossils you find in the layer, right? Now, according to evolutionists, because of that species of seashell next to the skull of this Hammersaurus is, according to evolutionists, more than 440 million years old. Anybody have a problem with that? Well, we're almost finished, but tonight I would like to show you the photograph of a friend we found not that long ago. Tonight I would like to introduce you to the limestone cowboy. Now, we know this cowboy died about, roughly 1950. Now, he was found in 1980, and his body had fossilized in less than 30 years. Hello? Yes. I hate to tell you this, but this is not rare. You dig in a graveyard that's been there for a while, and you're going to find many of the bodies in the graveyard are fossilized. And here, this is a fossil cowboy. This is actually his leg, ankle. We can date it because of the boot, the manufacturer, and the stitching style on there. And so we know he fossilized in less than 30 years. So tell me, is fossilization a rapid or a slow process? It's a rapid process. Well, I hope you've kind of enjoyed the presentation tonight about Dinomania. It's been a pleasure being with you.